All right, you're welcome back from that quick timeout. It is still Daybreak here on Trust TV, and it is time for our discussion segment. Now, before we went on break, I stated that we're going to be looking at a legal perspective, to this whole self-defense conversation that has been flying around the nation and the policy, and people have been talking about it from, David Mark to the CDS speaking about it, to various stakeholders talking about it. So we're going to be taking a look at the legal perspective of that this morning. So we've seen all of that. We want to understand what constitutes self-defense. What does it, when does it cross the line into excessive force? And what are the legal implications for individuals who claim self-defense? So joining us this morning in the studio, we have Chibueze Noel Maduka, a renowned lawyer with expertise in litigation, commercial law, and legal technology. Is the principal partner at Maduka LP and the CEO of mamasoft Solutions Limited. Chibueze brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to this complex topic, and with him we'll be delving into the legal framework surrounding self-defense claims, exploring the nuances of the law, and discussing the potential consequences for individuals who claim self-defense. Thank you so much for joining us, Chibueze.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for being here. Well, in the aspect that this self-defense has been brought up, especially with the happenings that's going on with the attacks in different places in different states. With now in Benue State, people are out saying that the best way is self-defense, for people to defend themselves, since the government is not doing anything as quick as possible. So when it comes to self-defense, what are the basis for someone to have the right to defend themselves against these kind of attacks in particular?
Okay, thank you very much. I would want to appreciate the studio for inviting me, and also extend my condolences to people in Benue, especially since it was a recent attack, and everyone that has lost their life in Nigeria to these senseless attacks and killings. We have to understand that first and foremost, self-defense is a constitutional right. In fact, it is a fundamental right because it's couched in Section 33 of the Constitution. So that whole gamut of Chapter 4 of the Constitution provides for your fundamental human rights. And it provides for self-defense. And specifically, 33 sub 2 says that if someone loses their life, okay, let's start with 33 sub 1, that guarantees your rights to life. Then Section 33 now talks about situations where someone can lose their life legitimately. And one of the ways where someone can lose their life legitimately is when someone loses their life as a result of an act of self-defense. So when someone kills somebody when they are protecting themselves from real harm or threatened harm, or for their property or a loved one, they are within their right to take someone else's life. So the Constitution provides for it, the Criminal Code provides for it, the Penal Code provides for it, and we have judicial decisions that also provides for it. Right? So you could see that the basis for which someone can use self-defense is that you are not the one that initiated the attack, so you are not the aggressor. Then there was an imminent harm or threatening harm on you. That's a second provision that was provided by the recent Supreme Court decision, a very controversial decision anyway, in Jackson and the States. I think it's 2025 decision. And the thirdly is that you couldn't have had a room to escape. There was no room for escape. And then that you killing the person, you didn't have any other choice but to kill the person. So the court looked at these 4 conditions. So these are the 4 conditions somebody must establish if you're going to exercise your right of self-defense. So you are not the one that initiated the attack, that whatever harm on your property or loved one was imminent or real, then there was no room for you to escape, and you had no other choice but to take the life of the person. Yeah. So those are some of the legal situations.
All right, before we start poking holes in that, because we have a lot of doubt about lawyers and Nigerian judiciary and the legal system, but at what point does self-defense cross the line? Now, what's the line between self-defense and a clear-cut criminal act, and what are the determining factors? Although you've mentioned a couple, but we know how it can be in court, where it is my lord, yes, my lord, no, sir, everybody's proving themselves differently. But at this point, where is that thin line between self-defense and an actual criminal act?
Okay, thank you. You could find a thin line in these 4 conditions that was laid down by the Supreme Court, not just in Jackson and the State, in the plethora of other authorities. Now, there's something that we call proportionality, right? So you're going to defend, if somebody comes to you with his fist, you're not supposed to defend yourself with a knife. So you are looking at someone comes to you with a stick, you're not supposed to be defending yourself with a gun. So there must be a bit of proportionality, and also it depends on the force somebody is using on you. So the point where the force you are using is disproportionate from what the person is using on you, you are now entering criminal act. Now remember, whenever you take the life of someone, it's murder or culpable homicide, depending on whether you're looking at the criminal code or the penal code. Now, self-defense is supposed to be, and is not supposed to be, it is totally exculpatory in the sense that it totally absolves you of liability for that particular crime. And you could also see that in section 32 sub 3 of the criminal code. So if you plead self-defense successfully, it absolves you. So nobody will say that you committed murder. So it's very strict to prove. So that's why those conditions are there. The court will have to look at the facts of each case to be sure that you met those things. So if you are the aggressor, if I come here and I'm attacking you, and then you attack and I kill you, the court won't say I killed you in self-defense because I caused the problem in the first place. Now, if I had disarmed you, let's assume you came with a weapon, or when you are attacking me, there are multiple options for me to flee the place without having to kill you or do something wrong to you. Yes, that can't really be called self-defense. So you have to see the thin line is in the conditions that were laid down, and the conditions must be proved, all of them must be proved together before you can have a successful plea of self-defense.
Well, earlier you mentioned imminent danger, immediate danger. With this particular scenario, like what happened in Benue, if, for example, as they were attacked, them picking up arms and, you know, retaliating, is that part of self-defense? And the aspect of people picking up arms, what law governs that as well in Nigeria?
Okay, what type of arms are we talking about? What kind of arms are you referring to?
Well, we would say guns.
Okay. Now, I was asking that question because, again, like I said, I talked of proportionality of, so, of course, I've looked at the social media reports, I've listened to the commentaries, and these guys were shot, some were macheted, some were burnt, right? So the threat there wasn't just, it was a real threat on their lives. You've had your neighbor shot, you are seeing your neighbor's house go up in flames, and that's the point. You know that if you don't do anything, you will be next, and most of them were next. I saw stories of a woman saying she lost 5 children, yes. A man saying he lost 20 family members. That's ridiculous. For nothing, what did they do? They slept, and then they didn't wake up. Yes, you have a right if you had arms at the time, but the issue is how many Nigerians have access to the arms that these people used to attack them. So if anyone had arms with them at that point in time, they are within their rights to fight back. They are within their rights to attack, and they are within their right to kill the aggressor, because you can't say that you are praying that it will not be your portion, because the other compound has been burnt. Somebody has died. Certainly they are coming to you next. So whatever you do, the law governs that, and that's why I say if you look at section 33 sub 2a, it provides that if someone loses their life when someone is trying to protect himself from harm, that you are covered by the law. You can raise an act of self-defense, because the point of self-defense is that I want to live. It's a law of self-preservation. Nobody wants to die. If I'm suffocating you right now, you're going to fight as much as you can. When somebody's drowning, they fight to stay alive. So that's the way it works. I can't see somebody enter this room with a gun, and I know there's no way to escape, and I will sit down like a ram to be slaughtered. Human beings are not designed like that. So the law understands it.
All right. Now, well, let's bring it now to community self-defense, which is what we're seeing the CDS calling for. We're seeing governors calling for, that we need community-led self-defense. Legally, can this function in Nigeria? What are the limitations? You know, do you think this can function in Nigeria? What are the limitations? What are the possible outcomes? What are the legal backing to it?
So when we look at legally community self-defense, of course, the closest we've seen to that, not the closest, we've seen it, communities have come up with vigilantes. Before we had the civilian GTF, yes, doing the terrorism issue, but the legal backing or the legal foundation for these things can still be seen in the Constitution. Okay. So the Constitution did not prescribe how or what modalities things could be done. So for issues of arms, of course, there's a point where you have to apply to the relevant authorities. I think I had the Director General of the DSS mentioning that sometime this year that people can organize themselves and they can apply for rights to carry arms. So that could be it. So the background remains, and that's why I mentioned that the right of self-defense is a fundamental right. because all the rights in Chapter 4 of the Constitution are fundamental rights, inalienable. It should not be denied anybody. So it's a fundamental right that everybody has a right to defend himself. And if you are being attacked as a community, the community has a right to come together and defend themselves, especially when we've seen that our security apparatus are either overstretched or they don't have adequate intelligence to counter these things before they happen. So, like I said earlier, human beings are not designed to sit down idly and allow bad things happen to them. A natural human being, or someone that, any person that breathes, wants to defend, wants to live. And as I gave the example of someone drowning, the person flaps his hands. He wants to come out even though he doesn't know how to swim. Someone that you are suffocating will do every way to remove whatever that is suffocating him. And that's where human beings are designed. So when communities are attacked as a community, the Constitution has provided that they have the right to defend themselves. The criminal code has provided for it. The penal code has provided for it. So all that needs to be done is for the community to come together and organize. And I think I had some people making arguments that if they had big men in those societies, retired generals, they can come together and find a way to apply for the relevant licenses or permits for people to carry arms. Because if we don't do that in this nation, one activist used to say that today's victims were yesterday's survivors. We don't know where it's going to be next. It was Benue last week Friday. It might be your village tomorrow. It's somebody else's auntie and grandmother. It could be any of us tomorrow. And these guys are everywhere embedded in the nation. The sooner we start defending ourselves based on what the Constitution has provided, the better for us.
All right. Quickly now, in cases where self-defense or the community have come up with a self-defense mechanism through vigilantes or joint task force, and this union came up that has been developed and created by the community is now perpetrating abuse against the community, what backing or what level of succor does the victims would they stand to gain? Because this is something we created to protect us against people, but now they are in turn abusing us and exploiting us. Where does the community stand and the victims who have experienced abuse from the so-called security apparatus we've created in the form of self-defense?
Okay, you know, someone said that there's really nothing new that happens even in Nigeria. I grew up in Onitsha, so in Onitsha then they had issues of armed robbery and it was bad. Of course, you would have heard of terrible armed robbers at the Rico. In fact, at the time, they would send you a letter that they were coming to rob
the entire
house,
street.
and they will come. You will make provisions for them. And I think the solution that the government provided at the time was what we call Bakassi. If you are very good with Nollywood, you would have it was a pop culture at the time. It was Bakassi. Some Nollywood called it Isakaba. Anyway, in Indonesia, they had Bakassi. So they were the ones that killed the Rico, killed a lot of all these other guys. They checked the criminality in Indonesia at a time. But at the time, people saw, so I'm using this as an example to answer your question. People saw that they were now crossing the line into criminality in the sense that people were now buying them to attack perceived enemies. And what the government did was to come out and ban them. So we have a point. Whatever this the community organizes is still subject to the constituted security apparatus, the police, the military, and what have you. So at any time that they are beginning to cross their line, of course, the government knows enough to step in and stop whatever they are doing if there is enough evidence to show that, one, that they are already crossing their line, and two, the purpose for which they were created has been solved. Because again, that's what happened in Onitsha. As at the time Bakassi operated for a while, we realized that criminality died down. In fact, people were so scared of Bakassi because you didn't need to commit a crime. It was said that if you were a criminal, there was something, a charm that you had, that they can just pick you out from the public. So people were very much afraid. So in between then, that the reason for which they were created had abated, and then they were already crossing the line. Government can always step in to stop that. But there again, the fear of that should not stop us from doing what is needful, because at the moment we have an imminent threat to lives of people. The 200 people or over, whatever, that died on Friday, whatever destiny they had, whatever plans they had been cut short. They entered this year thinking they will see the end of the year, and they didn't. And we know if nothing is done, another community will be attacked before the end of the year. So there are people alive today that will die soon because of some of these senseless people. So if we think of it that way, we understand that self-defense is something that we should do quickly.
All right.
With people being pushed to, try and defend themselves, let us look at the government and what are the laws that govern, the responsibility of the government when it comes to providing protection for the people before it comes to this point of people trying to defend themselves.
Okay, the law that we look at again, we go back to the Constitution. And the primary responsibility, is the protection of life and property. And you will see that in Chapter 2 of the Constitution. And before we start building roads, commissioning bridges, or human beings are going to use it, you have to protect their lives, you have to protect their property. That is a primary responsibility. And if you did history in school, when we talked about when life was short, brutish, and when everybody could do things, but we came together and signed what Thomas Hobbes called, or J.J. Rousseau that called it a social contract theory, where we gave the government, we could defend ourselves, we could fight people, but we gave that power to the government. That's why in Nigeria, you and I, we don't carry arms. We have a right to carry arms, as well, but we've given that right to the government, and we've told the government, okay, defend us, we in turn will pay our tax to you. So we pay our tax. In response, government is supposed to defend my life and defend whatever property I'm able to amass on planet Earth. So that's the primary responsibility, and you see these functions in Chapter 2 of the Constitution. So any government that fails in this primary responsibility has failed, regardless of whatever else that they're doing. Because if you build all the beautiful roads, do the pipe-borne water and everything, and the human beings that will use it lose their lives in very avoidable circumstances, it doesn't make sense anymore. Because who among us is going to invest in Benue State? Nobody will want to go to Benue State to invest. So Benue State won't even be talking of development of the economy. If they had debts, they won't be paying it, because nobody in their right senses will invest in a state that is so volatile when it has to do with security. So that's the first thing every government would do. During the times when bomb blasts were blowing everywhere in Abuja, right, 2013, 2014 period, people couldn't safely walk around and move around, but now we could, because those things don't happen anymore. So imagine what happens in Benue. So I think the primary responsibility of every government is in Chapter 2. And one of the first, which every government must pay attention to, is you protect the lives of people and you protect their property. If you can't do that, then allow them protect themselves.
You made mention of our right to bear arms, but what are the laws governing, the everyday Nigerians' right to bear arms or weapons? And what are the weapons that you are allowed to carry?
I think we have a law that prohibits people from bearing arms. However, if you should apply to the police to have one. And that's why I mentioned that if we are going to have those organizations, community should look for you. There is no community that doesn't have an influential person that can make these applications for them. The arguments I might not want to advance on live TV, but when we are going under the law, we can apply to the police. We can apply to the National Security Advisor. We can have these organizations come together and apply. So there are provisions under the law to make those applications to the police to bear arms. And there are arms they will allow you bear. There are private security organizations that bear arms. So of course they are set up to protect people. Of course, in Nigeria, we might not use it that much, but there are private security organizations, they bear arms. Some of them also bear high arms, depending on the applications and their fees that you are required to pay. So it's for communities to come together to organize themselves. Then if there are influential members in those communities, they can help out in some of these things, because the more we sit down and wait, there was things that, during Good Friday, it happened in Plateau State. It's April period. Yes, people died in Plateau State, and not one, almost 50. So April, May, June, we are seeing 200 people dying in Benue State. So we know that in a month or two, they will look for another community and attack. There will be collective outrage, we'll shout, we'll speak to Ranchi on TV, some people will go to sleep and they will attack people again. So it doesn't work that way.
It's sad. All right, Nigeria is a very diverse, country. Over 250 languages, lots of ethnic groups to throw around. Community policing, joint task force, self-defense, community-based self-defense. We'll also talk about the government being proactive. Now, I have two questions in one. The first one is, beyond as a legal practitioner, as a Nigerian, what pitfalls do you see in community policing? What are those lapses you see that might occur if Nigerians decide, especially communities decide to take care of themselves, especially based on ethnic, religious, and other crises? We have a community that might have people with different religious and ethnic groups. So what pitfalls do you see in terms of that, and how can Nigerian government, the legal system, or what kind of proactive law do they need to put in place to prevent these pitfalls?
Okay, for the first question, which is the reason why people has been fighting community policing, the first pitfall is the point that they could be hijacked by politicians.
Yeah.
Now, people still hijack the police in states. However, if you are the person that they're being used against, you can come to Abuja, so you can change the dynamics. You can go to the AIG in the different zones and change the dynamics. But by the time we get to the community police and knowing how the governors in Nigeria are, that they are teen gods in their enclave, certainly they can pocket either the commissioner of police, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And that's the fear everybody has. Looking at how governors already run amok in their states, how they deal with finances and everything, people are afraid that if you now give them full power to take care of the police, they are going to pocket the police, and there is nothing anybody can do about it. So that is true. But one of the things that can always save every nation and solve the problem is a strong and independent judiciary. Respect for the rule of law. If we have a nation or we have states where there's rule of law and a strong and independent judiciary, it means that if a governor or a strong man using the police to oppress me in my state, I can easily fight for fundamental rights, and those things are in the constitution. So the issue in Nigeria is not that we don't have provisions that can solve problems, is the fact that they are not being enforced. So you have a fundamental rights that says that nobody should be detained beyond 24 hours or 48 hours, depending on where it is. But go to police stations in Abuja, they still hold people for 1 week.
1 week.
We have judicial decisions that says police are not supposed to be used for debt enforcement or to collect money. But police still dabble into these things. So there are laws. Look at the ACJ. The ACJ has provided how trials of crime should go. But again, we see either judges or police officers not doing these things. So we have laws. There are provisions to forestall these things from happening. But do we have a strong an independent judiciary that will look at something in the face and call a spade a spade? So those are the things that can solve the problem. Because no matter how much you make the law, one of the jurists would say that is what the court says the law is what it eventually is. So no matter what the legislators are writing, it's the court that will look at it and say this is the law. So when we have a strong and independent judiciary that will look at the law and say, no, you didn't do this, and then we have respect of rule of law, that when the governor disobeys it, we know that he will be up for impeachment. And then I think I will add, if we have citizens that are alive to their rights, because the issue we have in Nigeria is that when you speak up against a particular political leader, people in his enclave will want to defend him. So anything you say about this present administration, people from his ethnic or religious inclination will want to rise up. And same thing that happened in the previous administration. So even if you want to say, okay, let us rise up and speak, people say, but when the other guy from the north was there, you guys did nothing. So let's keep quiet and allow our time to finish. So that's the problem, and those are some of the solutions that I think that can solve it.
All right, quickly, before we go, because they're already chatting that we should go. Before we go, yes or no, do you think community-based self-defense can work in Nigeria?
Yes, it can work because we don't have a choice.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Chibueze, for creating our time to join us on Daybreak this morning.
The pleasure is mine.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine. Thank you.
To our listeners, I hope you've heard that you cannot just go and buy a gun. There's a lot that needs to be done, and we have laws. We hope that one day our laws will work just the way it should. We're going on a quick break. When we get back, it'll be time to take a look at stories that made it to the front pages of our dailies. Do stay.